Today we have with us Dr. Vijay Sazawal joining us from the United States. He is an expert on strategic affairs of Russia and Ukrainian relationships. He has worked in the nuclear industry of the United States and was also instrumental in the civil nuclear agreement between the US and India. Welcome to Reason, the new Indians platform where we get to the reason of the issues that concern you. Welcome, Dr. Sazawal.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you inviting me to this platform. I look forward to this conversation.
Dr. Sazawal, I'll begin this conversation with the most obvious question today. We are facing a Russian Ukrainian war, and it seems to be triggering a global crisis. So, my question to you is there a context to this conflict, this war that we are seeing today?
There is actually. I noticed that the media has been calling it invasion of Ukraine, and I think that's true. And while I do not neither condone nor support any kind of violence, but I do understand and I do know that this war is not new. It has been going on for the last 8 years. And this war has its beginnings that go, quite frankly, all the way to the creation of the of post. I'm sorry, to the post Second World War, and then again to the breakdown of the former Soviet Union. So there are really two elements here. One would be in mid 1940s, and the other element would be obviously 1989, 1990. Some things happened in those two periods, which basically created this singularity in Ukraine on the western portion of the country. That led to, from 2014, that has led to a war. This is a war which is ongoing, war that has taken a lot of lives, war that where one party is claiming there has been a genocide, and a war that is basically ignored by the West, especially European Union, as well as by the United States. So one has to look at in that holistic view to figure out why Russia has done what it wants to do or is trying to do right now. But it certainly is not this week's war. It's not a war that started a week back.
Let me interrupt you here for the sake of our audience. Can you explain that on what basis Russia is claiming that there was a genocide perpetrated by the current dispensation in Kiev against Russians in Ukraine?
Yeah, let me see. What happened was in the Second World War, there was the number of fatalities that the Soviet Union incurred were in I'm sorry, in tens of millions, almost I think between 25 and 30 million Soviet Union residents lost their lives. Most of them were men, and you had a structure in the former Soviet Union where the eastern part of Ukraine was a really heavy industrial belt, and it still is. Kharkiv, which is a town where I'm very familiar with, is a major industrial town, and so all the eastern section was industrial. You have no men, so there was a concerted effort made by the Russian or the Soviet government at that time to sort of attract Russians to move from Russia to that portion of Ukraine. So they didn't want to go, quite honestly, but they were asked, told that it will be good for the motherland. Soviet Union is one country basically. These are all provinces. These are all republics of the Soviet Union, and so a lot of Russians left their homes in Russia and moved over, thinking that that was going to be their, home towards to perpetuity. And so, and these are primarily really the population going all the way up to Kharkiv, but because Kharkiv is a very large city, it has also obviously a mixed population of, normal residents of Ukraine, along with some of the Russians, but primarily the two eastern provinces, Luhansk and Donetsk. These are the two provinces which were totally populated by Russians coming over from Russia. Now, when the Soviet Union broke up and Ukraine became a republic, So these guys said, what about us? Where are we? We are Russians stuck in Ukraine. And Russians told them, don't worry, we will negotiate something with Ukraine that will basically keep your interests in mind. And they believed it initially, but there was obviously some forces which said, well, that can only be guaranteed with a certain degree of autonomy, and so on and so forth. And as soon as they started talking about autonomy, then the other section from the western side of Ukraine essentially became very agitated. They didn't like that idea and they resisted it. So there was basically a seesaw going on between what I will call, there's a concerted effort not to bring religion in the debate in Ukraine, or for that matter of fact anywhere in the world, except of course Western countries don't mind talking about Indian Hindu India and Muslim Pakistan. But the fact is, there is a clear division between the Orthodox Christianity, the Orthodox Byzantine Christianity in the east, and the Ukrainian Catholics on the west side of the country. And that schism between the religions is driving the essentially the lot of negativity of the eastern people towards the Russians who are in Donetsk and Luhansk region. So they didn't like the idea that they should get any autonomy, and so they started agitating. They had referendums in that area. Referendum said in 1989, 1990, about 85% people said, yeah, we want to have more autonomy. We want to be, treated as special class because we are not really, in a sense, we are kind of displaced people from Russia over here, and we need to be identified that our religion, our customs, our traditions will be protected, and they will not be taken over. Uh, so that seesaw element generated a lot of backlash, especially among the what is traditionally now called in the West as ultra white nationalists, or what even Moscow calls them neo-Nazis, but really they are Ukrainian Christians, Catholics, and they owed their origin to a certain terrorist in who sported the Nazi occupation of Ukraine, and then later became anti-Russian. So those militias, they have militias. Those militias basically joined in ensuring that all these Russians are pushed out of Donetsk and Luhansk. And so, and they virtually essentially kept going inch by inch, and blowing up their houses, killing them up, and so on and so forth. And eventually it reached to the point where we had a situation where the in 2007 the president was forced to the president Putin was at the Munich conference, basically said, guys, if you don't do anything about it, I got to do something. My people are demanding justice for the Russians who are being massacred, and you got to do something about it. Anyway, he was heard, but obviously nothing happened. And I think the war would have taken place in 2014, quite honestly, the war that we are seeing right now, the invasion. But it was due to the efforts of President Obama, who actually concluded a deal that involved all these countries, and we had the Minsk one in 2014 and Minsk two in 2015, which guaranteed essentially that these republics will have sort of their own quasi-independent structure within the Ukrainian federal structure. So the idea was that they will be getting that, but as soon as, quite frankly, the document was signed, the it was subsequently trashed by both European Union as well as the Americans. And so since 2014, this battle has been going on. This war has been raging, and
What triggered this war now? What happened? What provoked President Putin to go for this war at this stage?
well, it's very interesting. There is an interesting thing about Putin. Putin, when he came to power in 2000, he realized Russia was not in a position really to influence anything. They didn't have economic strength or military strength, more importantly, military strength to do anything. And in fact, a close friend of mine met him after the Iraq War and asked him, is Russian reaction to the Iraq War in 2003 has been rather muted. They asked him, do you think Russians are kind of sort of acquiescing to the American actions? He said, no, we are not. We are very unhappy. We're upset. Then he said, why isn't your reaction been very stronger? He says, what will I do? I don't have the might to make any difference. I may as well keep quiet because I can't make a difference. So the point is that I'm trying to make is that he has been building his strength since. He basically knew this day will come eventually. As I said, 8 years he has been essentially preparing for this. And rightly or wrongly, whether he will win or lose, I don't know. I mean, that will be the outcome will be decided in the future. But the fact is, he built up to it. He every occasion he got, he talked about it. But I think it would have probably happened in maybe 4 or 5 years back. I think the politics of United States probably restricted him to do it because people were already accusing President Trump of being a Putin stooge, which was a lie, which later out was also investigation showed that was a lie, but that was the narrative that was set in. So that kind of put a restriction on him because they thought it may cause actually President Trump to prove that he is not in his pocket to do something weird. So he basically waited until we had the new president, and that's when he started actively working on it. But the reality is, the exact date, really was decided by the Munich conference, where the Ukrainian president actually said many derogatory things about him in that meeting, and I think that's probably what got under his skin, and he decided he had to act now.
Now, let me bring in President Trump because he seemed to understand that it's important for Russia to remain uh, close to the Western Bloc instead of getting inclined towards China. He, in fact, even invited Putin for a G7 plus meeting, and which was ridiculed by many. Some people did see a reason and common sense for having to invite Putin because clearly Trump was trying to establish or consolidate the Western Bloc, which now seems to be completely ripped apart, completely torn today. NATO on the one side, Russia and allies on the other side. So tell me that was Trump right in inviting Putin? What was Trump's thinking, and what could have led had he been in power?
Well, Trump's thinking was very clear that Russia does not pose a strategic threat to United States, and really, I don't see anything that Russians are doing right now. They simply are not in that league. They are not really in a league to really challenge the authority of United States or United States interests. Chinese are, on the other hand, and if they are not, they are making up to it. They are almost building up the blocks to essentially take United States on the sea, on the air, on the ground. I mean, they are creating all kinds of bases around the world. They are building army, a navy like never have before have we seen, and they are putting money into their defense budget, which is incredibly large. So they are definitely a threat to United States. And more so, they are already threatening the global order that United States has established. So the question was, his own gut feeling was that United States was not in a position, because he always, if you notice in his speeches, you say, we are not really, our infrastructure is bad, our things are not going well in this country. So he really didn't think we were in a position to take on two big enemies at the same time. And he sort of put in a sort of a strategic hat and decided that it's best for me not to drive these two parties towards each other, and keep one other from here. It's interesting. Henry Kissinger had the same idea when he approached the Chinese. he said at that time the main reason for attracting Chinese is I don't want them to be embracing the Soviets. Now, as you see today, it has changed differently. Now Russians have embraced Chinese, and Chinese have embraced Russians. And last part of your question is very interesting because there was actually last week only. It may change because the president made a State of the Union address earlier. So, but last week only, people were asked. This was a Washington Post poll, which is Washington Post is the most favorable newspaper to President Biden, and it said that the reason for the invasion was that 59% of Americans feel 59% of Americans feel it was because they saw the weakness in President Biden. In other words, the President Putin felt that he's weak enough. He's not really he I can do it. And the same crowd said also in the poll that they believe that if 62% believe that if Trump was the president, this invasion would not have taken place. And what is interesting is 38% of these people are Democrats. So 38% of the Democrats who are normally, 100% opposite Trump believe that if he would have been the president, this thing would not have happened. So there is some feeling in Americans that we are, I like to call it the VP Singh movement in American history, and that's how, in a sense, Pakistan capitalized in India, and that's how that's what Russians are doing right now in Ukraine.
Lot of media information that has come out of the US, in fact Europe as well. It seems that the anger against Putin is real, it's genuine, that people really think of Putin as a monster, as evil, as somebody who needs to be, condemned for being an autocrat, for being a dictator. There is so much anger about his policies and how he treats his dissidents in Russia. Why? Why has the West come to this point that Russia, even as USSR got disintegrated in 1991, even after that, this animosity has prevailed between the West and Russia?
Well, honestly speaking, it defies logic because NATO should not have been. NATO was made to protect against the Soviet Union, and once the Soviet Union disintegrated, NATO should have been dissolved as well. The fact of the matter is that's what President Trump tried to do, and the deep state in the US absolutely refused it. And the bureaucracy that NATO has created in Brussels is really very immense and has very well connected people in it. When I say well connected, I don't mean necessarily to the United States, but to the governments of Europe. And so they have always been looking for a lease of life where they would be relevant. So for them, the relevancy has got factor is very important. That's why they need to add more countries to it, to the NATO platform. That's why they need to keep thinking about, how the enemy is doing and what we can do to sort of stay at, on guard with respect to Russia. But I also believe very strongly that it is almost like a Shia Sunni thing in Muslims. You have a schism here between, as I said, between it's very funny because when there was a war going on in Balkans, they used to call it's the Albanians are fighting the Slovaks, or Bosnians. Bosnians are fighting, the other one. They were never saying Bosnians are Muslims and Muslims are fighting against the Catholics or because somehow, as I said to you earlier, they feel that is kind of an unpleasant language to say, except when it comes to India, Pakistan, where they gore you every 5 seconds. It is Hindu India and Muslim Pakistan. But the fact is that from their point of view, see, people don't understand it because people have not understood how the media presents this information. There is a basic disinterest in, I mean, from a pure Catholic point of view, Orthodox Christians are treated as Ahmadis. They're not even considered to be Christians. So there is a genetic, almost a intense hate for Russia that has been created out of the natural religious bias that exists between these powers. Now, nobody in the West will admit it publicly. Nobody will admit it public. But I've heard it in private. I've heard it in private. These people cannot, as I said, it's the same thing, the schisms of Islam. It's the same. They simply cannot get along with each other because they have an intense, sort of almost pathological hate for each other. Otherwise, there was no reason. There was no reason at this time that they could not have settled this matter, given that 8 years this war has been going on. So, you can be cynical and say, well, they were waiting for him to be provoked enough that he can actually go and invade, so that NATO can go and justify its standing and its budget, and already Germany has going to increase the budget. And somebody was telling me yesterday, the new German budget, defense budget, is going to be larger than Russian budget. So you can see NATO is going to be rich in terms of the monies that will go into the hardware. All the military industrial complexes within Europe as well as in the United States will be all, beneficiaries. I expect the market values will go up on the stock market, so on and so forth. So this is a problem that is not going to go away. No matter what happens, this problem will not go away.
Now, my question is that the US has enjoyed a supremacy, unprecedented supremacy after World War II. And it has done that by one, having a very strong military industrial complex, which has earned massive amounts of wealth for the US through selling weapons to conflicts around the world, whether it's Middle East, whether it's East Asia, or even Africa. Why is it that now NATO and the military industrial complex of the United States are actually engaging in a war within the Western Bloc? And as you rightly pointed out, that there is a schism between the Vatican and Orthodox Church of Russia. But apart from that, the most, I think, common or prevalent theory in international relations was that the West actually does not go to war. In fact, after the disintegration of Soviet Union, the West did not go to war with each other on any issue. So why is it that on the one hand, the military industrial complex has had enjoyed a lot of power and influence through the conflicts around the world, but this time the conflict is in the Western Bloc itself?
Well, I mean, you would argue that the Western European countries still do not believe that there needs to be a war in Europe. And the military industrial complex there or in the United States need not worry, because they do create enough wars elsewhere, whether it's Afghanistan, whether it's Middle East, whether it's Africa. There are wars all over the place except in the European theater. So yes, they had an understanding that that should not happen, because we should be smart enough to do these things elsewhere and not in our neighborhoods. So in a sense, yes, the Russians broke that barrier. But as I said again, it is 8-year-old problem. If they had taken care of that problem, if they had, for example, the simplest, if they would have actually allowed the Minsk agreement to be implemented, uh, I don't think we would be there today, where we are today. It would be a lot different than where we are today.
Whom is it going to benefit in the end? This war between Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine is essentially acting as a representative of NATO in one way. Whom is this going to benefit? Is it going to be the same military industrial complex? You were mentioning Germany. Germany, in fact, has committed to put in $100 billion for a defense fund. In fact, they have also committed that they are going to 2% of its GDP will go to defense. So the question is, whom is this really helping? This war is it also China in some way?
Well, these are two different issues. I mean, as I said, war in general helps in the military-industrial complex. It's almost independent of where it is taking place and how it's taking place. They will all benefit because there are only 5 or 6 military weapon suppliers in the world. So it's a divvy. They will be divvying all the spoils of the war between them. But in terms of geopolitical ramifications, China is clearly the winner because China is watching to see for China. This war is really a kind of a laboratory observation. They are really watching and seeing what are the kinds of the sanctions that are, what will they do, how will they affect Russia, how will they affect other countries, and there's a lot of learning going on from that process, and what will be the reaction of these countries? How far can they take it? So for them, it's a almost like a military exercise, except it's not a military exercise. It's actually happening. So they're watching and waiting and progressing. And the amazing thing to me is the United States is really, if you look at the narrative of the media in this country, they are really, kind of giving them a pass. They're giving Chinese a pass. They're saying things like, "Oh, Chinese are not really happy with the invasion that has taken place, but they don't really want to say much." I mean, they're actually becoming apologists for Chinese. It's incredible to me what's happening here. Of course, the president gave his State of the Union yesterday. He didn't say a word about China in that whole speech. So you can see he didn't say anything about China. He didn't say anything about Afghanistan. He didn't say anything about Iran, where there'll be a new a shift as soon as the agreement is signed, because Iran is on way to making nuclear weapons now. I mean, there's a tremendous changes taking place in the world, but the obsession is Russia. So there we are. Chinese are clearly the winners in this exercise.
Now tell me, what is the way out for this crisis? Can the Western Bloc sit with Putin? Is there a possibility that they can come out of this war in a win win situation from all sides, except that Ukraine has hurt badly and Ukraine is, in a way, sacrificial lamb between the two sides? So tell us, is there a possibility of a resolution between these two warring groups?
Well, a lot of people who believe there is a win-win situation that can be made in the middle. I tend to be in that group also, and essentially we start with two things. We start with the fact that we have had resolutions of 2014 and 2015 on the origins of this war. Again, are the events that are taking place in the Donbass region. I mean, as much as the media here and media elsewhere, and I'm really sorry to see the Indian media, which is basically echoing the Western media. I mean, showing us the bombs falling in Kiev and all that, but that's not where there's actually a battle going on right now, where hand-to-hand combat in some cases, but that's all in the Donbass region. And notice, not one single cameraman from any Western sphere is actually there, because they would see then what is happening in Donbass region, because that's where, by the way, I mean, they're not even asking the question to the Ukrainians. Ukrainians are claiming 6,000 Russians have been killed. Well, where are those 6,000 Russians? They are supposedly all in Donbass region. But then again, they rather show the bombs falling, because that's where the ratings go up, and that's where, and they show the babies and the children and all that stuff. But the fact is, the real pain, real death, real sacrifices are being made in Donbass region. So that is the core of this issue. So the first thing, I think, in our case would be to make sure the Minsk agreements, which were intended to bring peace to that area, and I salute Mr. Obama for having done that, they should be revitalized. They should be obviously refurbished to the current state. But it's important that they be essentially accepted and put in place, because everybody had signed on to those agreements in 2014 and 2015. That would be one area. The second area is, the question is that you have a situation with respect to, uh, Russia genuinely thinking that there is no reason uh, that for their strategic interests should not be addressed. I mean, you can imagine how would India feel if tomorrow China were to announce that within 5 years we're going to put our ballistic missiles in Nepal. Do you think India is going to stay quiet? So it is the same situation. You have to accept the fact, particularly since, quite frankly, Ukraine is not a strategic interest of United States. Ukraine does not have any military use in that sense. So Ukraine could be part of a. So the issue is giving them the sovereignty rights, ensuring their sovereignty rights, ensuring their neutrality. That is the so the agreement has to be that you stay neutral, we'll give you sovereignty, we'll guarantee you sovereignty. So there can be an agreement. A lot of people think actually it should apply to Ukraine, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Moldova, that these four countries, which are basically surrounding Russia, they could be there could be a UN Security Council guarantee for their both their sovereignty and their neutrality, and so they don't have to be part of any military bloc, and yet they will be given the United Nations jointly will guarantee their sovereignty. So they don't have a problem on that basis, but insistence of NATO, Ukraine being a member of NATO, I don't think Russians will ever accept that. That is absolutely not the way to go. So that would be second one. The third one is dealing with these neo-Nazis, because quite honestly, they have committed significant war crimes in the Donbass region, and these are militias. These are like mujahideen. Actually, these are like almost like crusaders, and to a large extent,
And
perhaps they can
they
work it
be
out.
would they be Catholics? Would they be
Predominantly Catholic, predominantly Catholics, predominantly Catholics. Their hero is a guy named Stephen Bandaras. Stephen Bandaras was a son of a Greek Catholic, and he started this Nazi movement, which also became an anti-Soviet movement later on. And most of these followers, he started this organization called Organization of Ukrainian Nationalism, OUN, and OUN basically is the forefather of all these neo-Nazis that are running around there today. And so, in a sense, that part has to be also taken care of. Somehow, there has to be an accountability and justice for what has happened in the last 8 years in the Donbass region. But if you're not even, if the media is not even pointing their cameras towards Donbass, not even if they would rather talk about this building A or building B or building C in Kiev or Kharkiv or somewhere else, we are obviously not solving the genuine people's griefs, and we're not really coming to a closure on this particular issue.
But you pointed out a major fault line there, that it's also, in a way, a schism between Orthodox Church and the Vatican. And what kind of a resolution needs to be done there? Is there a possibility of a resolution? Can the Pope really reach out to Russia, reach out to the Orthodox Church, and bring this war to an end?
Well, for that, you have to first recognize that they see it in a religious way. They have refused to see it in a religious way. As I said, they use the words ultra-nationalists. With not they don't talk about Ukrainian Catholics. So the other guys are Russians. They are not called Orthodox uh, Christians. So they have refused to see it that way, and that's what, as I said, they did it in. Also, they did the same thing in the Balkans, because Balkans were also what the same thing. But they kept change. So in a sense, until you don't recognize that, so that's a hidden. See, for that you have to understand the so-called white culture. I mean, they talk one way and they think the other way, and their ability. It's not like Indians. You come to an Indian, within 2 minutes he will tell you what's in his heart. He will unload within 2 minutes of what on his mind. That's not from British occupation. That is not how Brits took the country. They were very, very conscious of what they speak and what they think. These were all two different things, and the same thing is true even in these countries today. So for them to recognize it's like that is very difficult. So they would not be talking in terms of Pope and terms of the that kind of thing. But politically they want to come to a resolution, knowing that religion is at the end of the day behind all this, but they want to do it on a political plane. So it has to be done on a political plane. I agree with that's the way to do it. But for that, I think they have to recognize that it's not a problem of today. It's a problem which is 8 years old, and finally Russia has sort of shown its hand because its back is to the wall, and obviously it will make a lot of mistakes now. Obviously there will be a lot of lives lost, unnecessary lives lost in my mind. It's a very sad thing. I again reiterate, I condone this kind of violence, and but the fact of the matter is that West owes certain degree of responsibility for what has happened today, and that is that they have been ignoring. And it's very funny. 2 days back, Ukrainians submitted to the UN a whole description where they said the Russians are claiming there's a genocide taking place, and then they went and showed how, based on the UN definition of genocide, it does not meet that criteria. Now, it's very interesting they would do that because the fact is, meeting the genocide criteria of the United Nations is not that easy. Because if you notice, there are not many genocides that have been accepted as genocides under the UN Charter. For example, the United States spent almost $300 million trying to get Rohingyas declared as a genocide in Myanmar, and they did all kinds of paperwork submitted. They still did not get there. You have the Ottoman Empire's genocide that took place of Armenians.
Armenia.
90, yeah, 90 countries in the world have individually agreed that Armenians suffered genocide, but United Nations criteria of genocide has not been met. So it was very interesting to me that they submitted a very detailed document about 3-4 days back to UN saying that no, the Russian claims of genocide in Donbass do not meet the UN criteria. But that's the nature of the thing. But honestly speaking, having myself seen from my own community how we were treated, and how we also call ourselves being subject to genocide, how NHRC said that Pandits suffered akin to genocide, and how nobody cared about it. So I see a lot of I see a lot of things in common with those Russians who are suffering in the Donbass region, and it's very interesting. The line that separates them from these zealots, from these neo-Nazi zealots on the western side of Donbass, that is called line of contact. It's called LOC, and that LOC is called line of contact. So you have same thing. You have sort of a mujahideen on the western side of LOC, and you have the civilian population essentially paying the price for being Russians in what will be a predominantly Ukrainian land. So so there's strange irony here between what has happened to Kashmiri Pandit community and what is happening here.
Well, clearly there is some similarity between Russians in the Donbass region and Kashmiri Hindus in Kashmir, both subjected to genocide. And uh, in Russia, and in fact, Putin made it a point that he is fighting for his people in Donbass region. Whether India is going to show some spine at some stage for Kashmiri Hindus who are yet to be returned and rehabilitated in Kashmir, we will see. But on this note, I will end this very enlightening conversation. Thank you for being with us, Dr. Sazawal, today.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to you and your listeners. Thank you very much.
Thanks.